I remember when you used to tell me you get mad when you're scared. It's okay to be scared.
Gentlemen, live around the world on pay-per-view.
McGregor for a long time.
Connor, why'd you do it? Connor, you have an anger problem.
I'll believe just as I did tonight, and I'll take the fight to him again, I guess.
And myself, as the greatest welterweight of all time. No one's finished him,
The UFC has been home to some of the most spine-tingling matchups and brutal wars. This is due to the fact that the organization has seen a meteoric rise over the years. They have been successful in giving the fans what they truly wanted. Much of the credit goes towards the thrilling rivalries and bitter feuds sparking up between the fighters, which elevated the levels of fights before the fighters even stepped in the cage.
Because you want to answer my question, maybe you'll answer yours.
I'm gonna make him squeal. He's talking all this. Steven, I'm gonna make him squeal.
We discuss the most personal and bad blood rivalries which ever took place inside the octagon.
With a fighting spirit since 1925.
Wants to stand and trade with Chuck. Let's see if that's the case.
Chuck Liddell and Tito Ortiz are perhaps the two pioneers of UFC which helped the organization gain popularity since the early 2010s. The most anticipated UFC fight for a long time was between the two fighters. Ortiz and Liddell long seemed destined for a showdown, frequently sharing cards. But sharing the same cage proved to be an entirely different matter. The alleged friendship between the two was the reason for this. Ortiz claimed that the two had trained together and grown close over time, sharing a gym and couch. Liddell, on the other hand, stated that while they shared a residence, their relationship was strictly business. The origins of this rivalry can be traced back to UFC 47 in 2004 when Tito Ortiz first traded punches with Chuck Liddell. Both fighters had made a name for themselves in the late 1990s, so even though they had never met before, the fight was highly anticipated. Part of this was due to the lengthy negotiation period preceding the fight, which lasted more than a year. Ortiz claimed they made a pact not to fight each other again, but Liddell denied this and called Ortiz a coward for avoiding the fight. The fight continued because Ortiz stepped up. In the first bout between the foes, a cautious yet intense first round ended with little or no action. The second began with Ortiz being punched in the eye, which he later claimed was an eye poke. That seemed to shake Ortiz, and Liddell took advantage of the opportunity by pressing forward and delivering a flurry of punches that bloodied Ortiz and forced the referee to stop the fight. The rivalry didn't end there, as Liddell established himself as the dominant champion and Ortiz as the underappreciated contender. Their feud only grew worse. Ortiz was given another chance to take on Liddell. The two ran it back at UFC 66. However, the outcome was the same. Liddell knocked down Ortiz but was unable to finish him in the first round. As the second round started, Ortiz decided to take the fight to the ground and eventually found some success. In the third round of the fight, while trying to secure a takedown, Ortiz made a mistake which led to Liddell mounting on top of him and finishing the fight by TKO. A trilogy between the two was again targeted for UFC 115. but Ortiz had to withdraw due to injury. Nevertheless, they would fight for the third time, but this time under different circumstances. The trilogy took place as organized by Oscar de la Hoya's Golden Boy Promotions in 2018. This time Ortiz won the fight after he landed a vicious straight right onto the chin of Liddell, knocking him out, thus putting an end to their rivalry. Chuck Liddell still had the bragging rights as he defeated Ortiz twice when they both were in their prime. Another classic example of best friends turning into bitter enemies is the story of Colby Covington and Jorge Masvidal. The reason for this is self-evident: bad blood cells. And these two have made their names in very different ways. Masvidal's rise in 2019 has been marked by straight-up violence, beginning with a vicious knockout of Darren Till, along with the infamous three-piece with a soda altercation backstage with Leon Edwards, and continuing with a 5-second knockout of Ben Askren and defeating Nate Diaz for the fictional BMF championship.
Making a lot of money, that's the only difference.
Bro, this is just the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, me slapping this dude around.
That's the cop.
Covington's rise has also been fueled by his controversial persona, which includes a Trump hat and divisive rhetoric that some say embraces xenophobia, a little racism, and a lot of personal insults toward other fighters.
Against the world.
They ain't no white man that make any
I'm the
money.
people's channel.
You don't sell nothing, bitch.
I'm Donald Trump's favorite
You don't
fighter.
sell nothing.
Before their rise to fame, Masvidal and Covington used to be best buddies. The two trained together with the goal of making money and winning championships. Masvidal had nearly 30 fights under his belt when Covington first showed up at a TT. Gamebred had already competed in over 10 promotions and was regarded as one of Strikeforce's best lightweights. Covington had a fantastic start to his MMA career, going 5-0 before signing with the UFC. Masvidal, his then gym partner, would soon become his roommate after the two moved in, trained together, and became best friends. Masvidal had moved up to welterweight in 2015, but had struggled to make a name for himself due to a string of close decision losses, and Covington, even after winning his fights, was threatened to quit the company because of being too boring. Covington changed the course of his career after a career-changing post-fight interview as he defeated Demian Maia in his home country, Brazil. After the fight, he called the Brazilians filthy animals and instantly turned heel, but their friendship would quickly deteriorate. The pay disagreement caused an irreparable major split between the best friends, and they were kicked out of the gym due to their rivalry. Masvidal was later invited back after things had calmed down, but Covington had other plans. While Masvidal is on a break from fighting, Colby becomes the interim welterweight champion. He loses the bout with Usman twice, while Masvidal goes on a run of impressive victories and has also 2 failed attempts at the welterweight title shot. While both the fighters are dealing with losses, UFC finally decides to go ahead with a bad blood matchup between the two to settle the beef at UFC 272. However, Covington crosses the line and attacks Masvidal's family in the press conference. Come fight night, Covington backs up his words and wins a convincing decision against his arch-rival as he wrestles with Masvidal for all 5 rounds. Masvidal concedes the defeat but makes it clear that the beef is far from over and Covington would soon face the consequences. And he later assaults Covington outside a restaurant, resulting in breaking his teeth, and which gets Masvidal arrested. This makes one thing clear: the beef between the two is far from over. After flatlining Jose Aldo at UFC 194, Conor McGregor was in the hunt for a double champ status. A week later, a certain Stockton-based fighter would give out one of the best post-fights callouts ever. After convincingly defeating Michael Johnson, Nate Diaz called out Conor McGregor in an emphatic fashion after blaming him that he is taking everything that Diaz has worked for.
Yeah, Conor McGregor, you're taking everything I work for, I'm gonna fight you. Don't no one want to see that, you know you beat them already. That's an easy fight.
Although that was not the original plan for McGregor, he was booked to face Rafael dos Anjos for the UFC Lightweight Championship. But 2 weeks before the fight, dos Anjos had to pull out due to a broken foot. This was uncalled for as the UFC searched for the perfect opponent for McGregor. Nate Diaz agreed to fight McGregor on such short notice. But the bout was moved to welterweight as Diaz was unable to cut a significant amount of weight. As predicted, the build-up to the fight was pure fireworks. It was Dublin's Wrecking Ball versus the Stockton Gangster as they traded all sorts of insults to each other during the press conferences, while Conor labeled Diaz as stupid and broke on many occasions. Conor McGregor was a heavy favorite going into the fight.
Nate can only count the 5. I don't know. Anything else? Anything.
When the two stepped inside the octagon, McGregor was able to pick up the tempo by being the aggressor. He unloaded shots at Nate Diaz and even performed some fancy spinning kick moves. When McGregor began to slow down late in round 2, the momentum switched. Nate Diaz took advantage of the opportunity and charged forward, effectively landing combinations. Diaz stunned McGregor with a 1-2 that wobbled the Irishman. Surprisingly, McGregor attempted a takedown, but Diaz, the more experienced grappler of the two, successfully defended and trapped his opponent in a rear naked choke. Nate Diaz astonished the world by tapping out Conor McGregor, the UFC's biggest star. This fight did around 1.3 million pay-per-view buys as both the fighters made tons of money. After losing for the first time in the UFC, it was a bitter pill to swallow for the Notorious. He immediately pushed for the rematch and got his wish granted by the UFC. The two faced each other again inside the octagon at UFC 202. This time the fans saw a much better gas tank from Conor as the fight was a total brawl between the two. Conor dominated the first half of the battle, but Diaz, who came alive in the second half of the fight, caused McGregor problems in the final rounds. It was one of those razor-thin decisions which could have gone either way, but the judges gave it to Conor as he avenged his loss after digging deep. The second fight did about 1.6 million pay-per-views. A lot has been speculated about the trilogy fight, but both the fighters went their separate ways after fighting each other twice. Nevertheless, both fighters approaching their late 30s now are not the dominating forces they once were, with Conor losing 3 fights and breaking his leg, and Diaz also losing to 3 major opponents until beating a washed-up Tony Ferguson. So a trilogy between the two would not be a bad choice for either of the two if Nate Diaz decides to come back to the UFC for one last showdown. One of the most bitter and intense rivalries in the history of UFC was between Jon Jones and Daniel Cormier. Both the fighters have achieved almost everything this sport had to offer. It all started in 2010 at UFC 121 when Cain Velasquez defeated Brock Lesnar for the heavyweight championship. At the backstage, a young Jon Jones walked over to Daniel Cormier, who had an image for being a top Olympic wrestler and Cain Velasquez's wrestling coach. Jones made a joke to Cormier about taking him down, which did not sit well with Cormier at all, and that's how a rivalry sparked between the two.
So creative and so long, you have to get in his face, and that was the only way that I was going to be able to fight him.
Both fighters were vying for the light heavyweight title when they first met in the octagon in 2015. Jones was defending his title for the 8th time, while Cormier was competing for the first time. The build-up to the fight was typically dramatic, with Jones making death threats and Cormier promising to spit in Jones' face.
Let's fight it, John.
Wish they would let me next door so I could spit in your fucking face.
During their altercation, the two began a brawl at the MGM Grand Hotel during the face-off where they had to be held back by security on fight night. However, there was a clear winner, with Bones putting on a dominant performance across 5 rounds to convince the judges to award him the victory. However, when Cormier continued to punch Jones even after the fight was over, it was clear that their feud was far from over, and the pair would meet again in the octagon due to the level of animosity between the two. 2 years later, the rematch was scheduled, and this time Cormier held the light heavyweight title as Jones was suspended after UFC 182 due to him being involved in a hit-and-run case. As for the rematch at UFC 214, the pair's bad intentions for one another were on full display once again, and they shared a heated pre-fight interview that has gone down in UFC history as one of the best.
We finally got him to come back. He can stop running. I'm gonna kick his ass this time.
Jones emerged victorious once more, knocking Cormier out with a vicious head kick in the 3rd round. The decision was reversed after Jones tested positive for drugs, but the event is still fresh in the minds of fight fans. To this day, the relationship between Jones and Cormier has been salty, and Cormier remains stern in his opinion that he will never forgive John Jones.
Those things that happened did really bad damage to my career. Seemed to be on different paths, obviously. Water on the bridge it will never be.
The height of Jones makes the underhooks from DC not as Conor McGregor is one of the best trash talkers in the history of sports. His ability to crawl inside the opponent's minds before the fight and force them to make mistakes is what the Notorious excels at.
The celebration, you ring back home, you ring your wife. Baby, we done it. We're rich, baby. It doesn't matter weight. It doesn't matter if it's a featherweight, a lightweight, a welterweight. It's the McGregor belt. Chance to apologize to absolutely nobody. But I dreamed into reality. Oh, that looks good.
But what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object? That's where the greatness of Khabib Nurmagomedov falls into place perfectly. Khabib versus McGregor was without a doubt the most hated rivalry, not only in MMA but perhaps in the history of the sport. The reasons behind it are the events that led this rivalry to turn into a war before and especially after the fight. The origins of this rivalry started at UFC 205 when Khabib and McGregor exchanged words for the first time backstage. Conor faced Eddie Alvarez for the lightweight championship. At the same time, Khabib, who was already a contender in the division, faced Michael Johnson. Both Conor and Khabib won their fights in dominating fashion, setting up a future clash between the two. But Conor would go on to fight Floyd Mayweather. Meanwhile, Khabib would work his way up to the title shot.
You wanna fight or something like this? Send a message, hey, come here, this place, and that's it.
During the fight week, Artem Lobov, a friend of McGregor, made fun of Khabib, which sparked the controversy. Khabib caught him along with his team during the fight week and slapped him. This did not sit well with McGregor, who took a jet along with his goons and stormed the Barclays Arena, attacking the bus Khabib was in. McGregor threw a dolly, breaking the glass of the bus, injuring many fighters, and fled the scene.
Guys to the corner, because we know this. And how he get 30 guys with him.
Send me a message, like location, I'm gonna come. Whatever you want, doesn't matter.
He was later arrested for his actions. Khabib would go on to win the lightweight belt after beating La Quinta. The UFC started working on a fight between Khabib and McGregor, and it was made official for UFC 229 on October 6, 2018 in T-Mobile Arena. During the build-up to the fight, Conor McGregor clearly threw insults at Khabib's religion, father, wife, and ethnicity. He crossed all the lines to get into Khabib's head. Even McGregor's crew took to social media to make fun of Khabib. Khabib only had one answer to all of McGregor's trash talk, which was to maul him when they both are closed inside the cage. The fight was one-sided as Khabib backed up his words and mauled McGregor.
Tomorrow night, I'm gonna smash your boy, guys. I'm gonna smash your boy.
But it was the Russian's antics afterward as he jumped the cage and attacked Conor's teammates, which caused a scuffle in the crowd.
Khabib's teammates jumped into the octagon and attacked McGregor as well. The whole situation had to be controlled by the security officers, and fighters had to be escorted back to the dressing rooms. This melee also caused unrest among the fans as they also indulged in fights with each other. The war between the two fighters had drastic effects, and it was labeled as a black eye for the sport. The Nevada State Athletic Commission suspended Khabib for 9 months and fined him $500,000, whereas McGregor was fined $50,000 and was suspended for only 6 months. To this day, both the fighters have hatred for each other, with Khabib mentioning in an interview that he will never bury the hatchet with the Irish, and they will fight if they ever were to see each other in a random place. Conor McGregor also once in a while takes jibes at Nurmagomedov or his family in his social media posts, indicating that the bad blood boils to this day between the two.